AFIO Now is presented by Northwest Financial Advisors, where our world revolves around you.
Hello, everyone. This is Jim Hughes with AFIO Now. We are a program of recorded interviews with former U.S. intelligence officers and those who write about them. And I'm very pleased today to welcome back someone who is both. Leon Carroll was a U.S. Marine Corps officer, and after he finished his military duty, he joined the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, where he was a special agent for 20 years. During that time, he served in 7 different locations, including afloat. And toward the end of his career, he was the special agent in charge in the Pacific Northwest, and most important for today, in the Republic of Panama. Leon has a brand new book out called Ghosts of Panama, which I have just read. And I'm looking forward to having him tell you about it. Leon, welcome to AFIO Now.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Leon, please remind our audience who Manuel Noriega was and how he came to power in Panama.
Well, let me start with saying that when I got to Panama, I was totally awestruck by what the autocratic rule had done. And one of the things that I wanted to do is look back to see how this happened. And with Noriega, who was just a simple guy, but he was able to infiltrate the intelligence community. He was very military oriented. As a young child, he grew up in an area of Panama City called El Chorrillo, which is the poorest part of town, and it remains that way, actually. And he was able to go to military schools trained by military intelligence officers and worked his way up in the Panamanian Defense Force as an intelligence officer. And he, at that point, was the intelligence officer for General Torrijos, who preceded him as the dictator of the country. And the rumor is that although Noriega helped him survive a coup, that later on Noriega was behind him dying in a plane crash. So Manuel Noriega was a very, very crafty individual, not overly educated by any sense of imagination, but he knew how to work the street game, as we would say in most places, and he was very good at what he did.
Leon, who was Rick Yell, and how did his meeting with the old man affect future developments in Panama?
In telling our story, Jim, we wanted to really focus on someone who really was outstanding, but not the ordinary NCIS, or at that time NIS special agent working counterintelligence. Rick was actually a crim agent, did general crimes, the homicides, the robberies, and things of that nature. And he kind of fell into a source that turned out to be a great counterintelligence source. And initially, Rick was looking at him as being a source to use for drugs. At that time, as you know, Panama was well known for being a transshipment point. Rick is from the South. He worked in a police department, small police department in Alabama. And then he was also a graduate of Jackson State University, where he met his wife, Annya. And we definitely wanted to make this a book where we not only talk about the agent, but also the agent's family. And so Annya and his daughter Shelby play a pretty big role in our book.
And who was the old man, and what did he become?
Well, the old man, we have chosen not to release his true identity. And that's still going to be a topic of discussion as we go forward with the release of the paperback. But the old man was Afro-Caribbean, had been in Panama for quite a while. And when we say old man, right now, I'm older than he was when we referred to him that way. But he just had this wisdom about him and how he would kind of talk to us. And I did meet with him personally myself on 2 occasions, but he just had this wisdom about him that made us feel like he's your grandfather, right? That or your uncle. That's the kind of person he was. But he was very much a loyalist for his country. He did not like Noriega at all, which was not the case with all Panamanians, by the way. A lot of Panamanians saw him as one of them because his status of coming up out of poverty and becoming a powerful individual. But the old man didn't see it that way and made sure that he did whatever he could to see him taken out of power.
Who was Ted Fahey and what was his role?
Ted Fahey, believe it or not, NIS agent, and he was actually assigned in New Orleans at the time that this all started in our resident agency there. Ted's background is his dad was American military and his mom was a Panamanian citizen. Ted remains dual citizen and actually maintains property in Panama as well. So he was fluent in Spanish, obviously. And when we were looking for, not necessarily me, but my predecessor 2 times before, was looking for someone who knew the country, knew the language, and could come in and help. And so he had learned about Ted being in New Orleans through a customs source who had sent information about some Navy boats that were being worked on for the Panamanian Navy in New Orleans. And that's how that connection began. And the particular special agent in charge at that time talked to Ted, had him come in for a temporary duty, and he worked with our office and with Rick Yell as a partner. And he was introduced to the old man as well, more for the fact that he knew Panama, he knew how to really vet the old man and the information that he had. He returned back to New Orleans, and it wasn't too long after that, within a year, he received permanent change of station orders back to Nisra Fort Amador in Panama. And he and Rick Yell were pretty much the two NCIS agents or NIS agents at that time that worked the old man as his handler.
What happened in Panama to cause the U.S. government to change its attitude towards Noriega?
I think Noriega was the cause of that. As you probably know, and I'm sure most of the intelligence officers that did Latin America, at that time, we were trying to really protect against the Russians, and just before 91, 92, when the Soviet Empire fell, against the Soviet Union. So that's what the focus was. It was more towards anti-communist. But at the same time, most of the United States were experiencing this influx of drugs, mainly cocaine, coming out of Colombia and other places south. And unfortunately, this relationship between ourselves and Noriega got stale because he went for the money. He went for the money and the notoriety of, being the middle guy on transshipment of drugs and financially on the money laundering end of things. And we started to call him out on that, and he didn't like it. Publicly at high places in Washington, D.C., he became persona non grata. And his thing was to fight back at that because he didn't feel like he was being given the respect that he was due. And Noriega was on many, many intelligence payrolls, probably on the NIS payroll. That wasn't the case when I was there, and I didn't see any record of that, but I saw other evidence that there was some type of connection when I came into the office. So I think that he just spoiled himself with greed and power is what happened with him. And it became a situation where he was antagonizing U.S. citizens in Panama. When I say he, not necessarily him personally, but he was pushing the Panamanian defense forces that were patrolling the areas around the Canal Zone and the military bases to treat Americans in a disparate way.
Leon, who was Kurt Muse, and how did he figure into Operation Just Cause?
Kurt Muse was an interesting character, and he was a businessman. His family owned a business in Panama for decades, and they were making big money. And what happened probably, well, not too long after Noriega took over, he was looking at, hey, this is a dictatorship and it's really impacting my bottom line as well. And he formed a group of people who were anti-Noriega. And his big claim to fame was orchestrating a kind of not a coup, but a public propaganda campaign against Noriega, to the point where when Noriega was giving a speech, rallying the troops in the country and all of that, they were able to infiltrate with a free, liberate Panama message during his speech. And that didn't bode well for Kurt Muse once they found out who they were. And being a Rotarian, I have to say that there was a member of the Rotary Club in Panama at the time who was part of that group. So I felt really, really good about knowing that Rotary did something that helped the cause, so to speak, down there. But anyway, that went on for quite a while, and as most of the intelligence officers would know, that Panama didn't just have two parties. In fact, when I was there, it was up to like six. So the vote was divided quite well. So it was tough to really, really stop someone who was saying, "I don't care about the vote. I'm going to take over," and that was what Noriega did. Well, when Muse came back into Panama, and probably 6 or 7 months before we did the invasion, he was arrested and jailed and put in Modelo prison. And Modelo is not a place you want to be. And he was there, had no idea how long he was going to be there or what was going to happen. But what had come to fruition was the fact that he was looked at as an operational asset for the agency, and that was the guise or the means that they used to keep him incarcerated. So he became a political asset as well as an internal asset for the freedom of the country. And when Just Cause happened, part of that mission was to free Muse from the Modelo prison.
How did actions by the Panamanian National Assembly and an attack on an American school bus accelerate U.S. planning for Just Cause?
Well, it had been building up for a while, Jim, this animosity. And what happened was the Assembly had a vote, and which actually declared war against the United States. I believe it was in early 89 or 88. And that didn't set well with with George Herbert Walker Bush. And so they started this action. Hey, we've got to do something about this. The school bus incident was one of the first big incidents that happened where Panamanian Defense Forces did stop a school bus, a DOD school bus, and detained the students there. And that didn't go over very well at all. And so that's kind of where the National Assembly comes in. And from there, it went downhill really, really quickly.
Describe briefly for our audience the Delta Force attack to rescue Kurt Muse.
Well, one of the things that happened with this had been planned for a long time. Different, and the operation had different names before it became Just Cause when it actually happened. And Kurt Muse was someone that they really felt they wanted to get out. So when our forces in Panama were limited in terms of numbers. So we knew that we were going to have to bring in people from the United States to carry this mission out. So all the different entities had their own areas in which they had for their mission. And for whatever reason, I don't know, you have SEALs and you have Special Forces, but Delta Force got the mission to rescue Kurt Muse. The SEALs had the Patia Airport. And when this mission happened, the embassy had sent the military attaché there to visit with Muse and kind of give him a little bit of a warning. Hey, we're going to get you out. And he had no clue how this was going to happen other than they're going to have to come in with birds. And they did come in with small helicopters, one of which crashed. And he had always talked to the guard who was outside of his cell about, hey, if I tried to leave, would you kill me? And that type of thing. And the guard said, absolutely. And so when this all came down, Muse was hearing all the gunfire and all of that. And he was concerned that, this guard was actually going to shoot him. But what showed up at the door were Delta Force soldiers. And the spelling of Muse to them was Moose. So they kept calling him Moose. And he was like, I don't care what you call him. Call me. As long as you're getting me out of here, I'm good to go. Right. So they did rescue him. There were some injuries and all of that, but he survived it. And the rest is history. He's actually talked about it. He's done books and he's done interviews as well. And if you had a chance to really interview him, I think he could give you great detail about what his experience was like in Modelo.
How did U.S. forces rescue American citizens at Fort Amador?
That's a really interesting story. Fort Amador, as you know, was a joint military base for Panamanians as well as Americans. So we had the enemy basically right around the corner from us. And the run up to the invasion, they would always do exercises literally outside our headquarters building. We were housed in the Comnaf South building, which is something different right now. But so you could see these rehearsals and exercises going on for them to defend Fort Amador. So Admiral Janekow, who was the commander of Naval Forces South, knew that he had to protect all the naval forces, which the Navy, by the way, was the smallest group of military personnel down there. We had NAV State Pan Canal as well as some folks at Amador, but mainly no ships. Was just a transshipment point where ships would come in and moor at the Rodman Naval Base, maybe refuel and that type of thing and move on. But there were no home ported ships there. But what they did have were intelligence assets, and we did have a Navy SEAL teams there. And a lot of times they would come in and train. And so when that would happen, we thought we have to have an evacuation plan. And when I say we being those in counterintelligence. And it just so happened that Admiral Janekow's son was an NIS agent assigned there at the time. Now, they rarely, if ever, talked about business or anything like that. In fact, his son didn't even know what the evacuation plan was. But Rick Yell did know, and Rick was the assistant special agent in charge at the time. And his boss, Chuck Bryant, who's in the book as well, was actually on leave. And so when the plan was being developed, the admiral had Rick come up and say, hey, we have to find a way to secure all these people that are here at Fort Amador. And one area of interest is your house. You're in our way. Your house on this base is right in the line of fire, so to speak. So you have to figure out a way to get your family out of there without alerting other people that this is going to happen. So this put a lot of pressure on Rick, who, by the way, his family was noticing different changes with, units coming in, helicopters, planes, and all of that, flying into Howard Air Force Base and also NAV State Pan Canal. And so everybody was kind of aware something was happening, but they didn't know exactly what and certainly not when. And the admiral himself decided, well, there's not going to be a really good way to get everybody evacuated. So I am going to open up my house, which had what was called a safe room at the time. And we're going to herd as many people from the base here in that particular location as we can. And his wife was the one who had the shotgun. I don't know how much that would have done against the company of PDF forces, but anyway. And so that was what was done for the families that were living at Fort Amador itself, which wasn't a lot of military or civilian military and their dependents living there, but well over 30 families. And so that was kind of the plan for there. And on the other side of the canal, which is where the naval station was, they had their own plan for how to survive this whole incident. And mainly they were put into separate areas as well.
And after all the fighting was over, Leon, what was the casualty count on each side, on both the U.S. side and the Panamanian side?
In terms of the Panamanian side, I can't really say for sure, but it was estimated at thousands. And in my recent trip there, I kind of had the feel that that's probably accurate in the 2,000 or 3,000, and mostly obviously civilians. On our side, there were 23 or 24 killed and 300 some odd wounded. Unfortunately, and intelligence is being blamed on this. I'm not so sure that's the case with the Navy SEALs that were at Patia Airport, but 4 Navy SEALs were killed at Patia Airport. But I think casualty-wise, it would be hard to really, really get a true number on the Panamanian casualty side because, as I was just told in my visit there by people who were there, saying that there were bodies in the street and we were just pulling them off the streets and there was nobody really taking count of them. So I think that number, I'm sure, was well north of what we lost in our 24 military people.
And after Operation Just Cause, what operational successes did Chuck Bryant and Rick Yell obtain?
Well, it's interesting about that, Jim. Operationally, they were recognized for what they had done prior to the operation. And had they not been a counterintelligence unit, they probably would have won an intelligence award for what they did. The information that they were providing was deemed positive intelligence, but they were not a positive intelligence collection agency, so they didn't receive that, but they did receive meritorious unit citations. And following that, there was like that 11, 12-month gap between myself and Chuck. Now, Chuck has volunteered to go to the Middle East right from Panama. And he was a guy that just sought the action. So he got orders to Riyadh and left before I even got there. And I think back about that, and the whole focus of what we were doing at the Nusra had kind of changed. We had to go now into counter narcotics more and counterterrorism a little bit more. And the country was definitely in an upheaval. It was very, very dangerous. I even had an agent who was robbed meeting a source one time, and they recognized that, because he was armed, that he probably, was who he was. They didn't care. They just took the money and ran. And that's how desperate people were. And he came out of the restaurant that they were in, and he's yelling, and he was a fluent Spanish speaker, by the way. And he was yelling, "Hey, we've been robbed." And the now former PDF person, now they're police. They took the PDF and turned them into police officers, the Panamanian National Police. They take off their M16s and they start shooting at these guys running away. And our agent is yelling at them, "No, no, don't shoot them." And that's how crazy it was there. It was unbelievable. And as I say in my book, I knew I was in a different place when I arrived, and the two agents picking me up pulled out the Uzi submachine guns from underneath the seat of the vehicle as we rode in from the airport into the base. So it was pretty crazy. But as far as their successes go, Rick left even prior. I think he left within 6 months of Operation Just Cause occurring. So there wasn't much operational activity, although the old man was turned over to successors, and that's how I ended up meeting him. I didn't run him. I was the boss of the office, but I did do 2 meets with him and got to know him fairly well.
Leon, in the book, there are some suggestions that there was tension between the CIA station and the NCIS office in Panama during all of this. Any idea why that was?
Well, the only thing I can say about that, Jim, is I didn't sense that, and I don't think the agents sensed that from a working level type of thing. But what I think I found was I had been there maybe 3 or 4 months, and the director of naval intelligence, who was Admiral Brooks at that time, was going from Gitmo back to the United States, and they asked him to stop to Panama to meet with the diplomatic folks at the embassy in Panama. I get a call from his aide saying, "Hey, the admiral would like to meet with you," and I'll never forget it. It was on a Sunday morning, and he said to me, he goes, "Leon, if you think you have any friends down at that embassy, you're sorely mistaken." And I was kind of shocked about that. But I think that the issue was, here we have this little 5-person outfit that's going around doing things that probably some of the people higher up, not the people we were working with, because in my opinion, we had a really good relationship with the operators, right? But from the political and diplomatic end of things, they had an agenda that, they brought in a new ambassador, actually, and most of the people in the station at that time had been sent other places. They brought in a new chief of station. And so I think there was a real change in direction on where they wanted things to go. And part of it was to put us back in the box, so to speak. And I think that's what we're referring to in the book.
Leon, of course, you were SAIC shortly after Just Cause, and you told me off camera that you have just returned from a personal trip to Panama 30 years later. Would you like to share with our audience, one, some of your impressions immediately after the operation, but then two, your impressions now 30 years later and what you found when you went back?
Absolutely. I was amazed. So I would have to say this. When I went down, they weren't allowing dependents in 1989, probably 88, 89, until probably mid 91 or so, that they were not allowing military or civilian dependents to come in. And there was a good reason for that. It was really dangerous. We were doing robberies every week coming from Tacoma National Airport. Someone was being robbed or kidnapped or whatever. In fact, I remember one incident clearly. I was staying in the BOQ, but we share a suite with someone else, and the person that was arriving that Friday night he came in and was really pissed off. And he even asked me if I would give him my weapon. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, and he was a Navy SEAL, by the way. And he goes, I just got robbed on the way from the airport. I'm going to go find these guys. And I'm like, I don't think you guys, let NIS try to deal with this. And he calmed down, and it was that kind of tension that was going on. And when my wife came down for a visit, she was shocked. Well, one, at the airport where the armed police were there. And when I say armed, with automatic weapons armed, not just, sidearms and that type of thing. And also at a lot of the stores in downtown Panama City, you'd have the guard, kind of what we see in our country today, but we weren't like that in 1989 and 90, 91. And so I thought about that when we got back down there, and you don't see that anymore. And I was like, wow, this place has really changed. Now, I have to admit, we spent most of our time in Boquete and Cherokee Province, which is peaceful, and the whole atmosphere is totally different than Panama City, which has grown immensely. So I mentioned the airport. When I was there was only one terminal and one road that kind of was a back road, which made it really easy to rob people because you're like going through little small villages and towns and stuff. They now have a pay toll road that goes from the airport into town, and it takes probably half the amount of time that the old road did. And there's no way, unless somebody just runs you off the road, that you're going to get robbed on this freeway. Well, it's not free, toll road. So that was one of the things that I noticed immediately. Then we did a tour of all the places that, I recognized from when I was there, other than we didn't go all the way to Cologne, but we did go to Fort Amador, which is now a resort. The building that we were in is now the Ministry of Security, and they have it all jazzed up. And the houses that were in the way of the invasion, they're not there anymore. The Treaty Affairs building, which was kind of two doors down from us, is still there, but it's also part of the Ministry of Security. You go out on what was called the Causeway. When I was there, I always thought, hey, I'd love to retire here because I could rent bikes on this. And there's only one way out. So there's no way they're going to steal my bike, right? They got to drive the bike right by where they rented it from. That's no longer the case. Now there's two accesses in. That road that was only a 2-lane road is now a 4-lane road. They brought in all types of new infrastructure out there. They just built it up. There's a cruise terminal out there. They have a convention center that, would make any convention center we have here blush. So when I looked at all of that, Howard Air Force Base, which was a huge Air Force base, now it's all got private residences on it. Rodman Naval Station is no longer that just one pier thing. Now it's many, many container terminals on the other side of the bridge. It was just phenomenal to see all the improvements. not only, as I mentioned to you before we started this, there was only the Bridge of the Americas when I was there. Now there are 3 bridges, one on the Atlantic, called the Atlantic, from Cologne that crosses the canal, and one north of the Miraflores locks, and it's called the Centennial Bridge, state-of-the-art bridges. And so I say to my guys who were there, and only Mike Ginecco was still there when I got there, but what they did and what they were a part of, they didn't do it obviously by themselves, but what they were a part of to make that change in Panama is paying dividends right now. I don't know what the drug situation is down there, but I would imagine there's still some of that, but it's not like open season, which is what it was when I first got down there. We would have kilos. I remember once we were called over to the Naval Communications Center over in Cologne because kilos of cocaine had washed ashore. There were 40 kilos on the beach. And so I kind of doubt that that's happening, but that was a lot of money. And even on our criminal side, when I was there before, we did a lot of counter narcotics intervention, and we worked with DEA and that. So the change has been astronomical. The key thing that I thought was interesting was they're building a tunnel for cars to go under the canal. It'll be open in another year. And I saw some of the stations. They already have a subway or a rapid transit system on the other side, but now they're connecting them because there's so many people that are now commuting from where Howard Air Force Base was, and kind of still is, and where Rodman Canal was, so both U.S. military installations they're going over. The old golf course near Rodman Naval Station is now not a resort, but a high-end community. The golf course is kind of the focal point, and it's got houses all around it. So and a couple of the buildings are still there, like the old Marine Corps Exchange, that's still there, but I don't know what they're using it for, but it's been overshadowed by all of these brand new homes and condominiums.
Well, the name of the book is Ghosts of Panama. It is a fascinating read. I recommend it to you all. And I want to thank Leon and Carroll once again for a great story.
Well, thanks, Jim. I'm glad you invited me back. I'm glad you read the book. It's still, out there, and we definitely encourage people who were in Panama at any particular time to buy it, but also anyone else interested in Panamanian history. You can tie a lot of the pieces together that you may not have known about. And Mark Harmon and I, definitely our goal was to take little known people who were involved in big events and try to get their stories out to the general public. And hopefully we did that with Ghosts of Panama.
AFIO is a small, nonprofit, apolitical, educational organization whose main mission is to help prepare the next generation of intelligence officers to confront the challenges our nation faces in the years ahead. To learn more or support our outreach programs, visit www.afio.com.